Genesis chapter 34 is where we're at tonight. This is a little bit PG-13, so I have to plug their ears a little. But Genesis 34 is one of those books. It's like, why is this in the Bible? And yet the Bible tells us, one of these chapters, it's why is this here? And the Bible tells us that God's word is profitable for instruction and teaching in righteousness and, fully equipping the man of God. I butchered that verse, but you understand what I'm saying. I mean, God puts these things here for our learning, and all Scripture is profitable for that. And so we see just kind of a sordid tale in chapter 34. And, it's one of those, chapter 34, and I think, again, was it chapter 38? A couple really, rough chapters in the Old Testament that we come across, and yet it just kind of shows that even God's people have rough times, and things could be going really well, and then things can go sideways very fast. I found that out the other day. I was actually coming home from work. I just found out that we bought this property, super excited, and I get home and I pull into the driveway, and kind of have some bushes growing next to our driveway, so I can't really see as I'm coming in, and I try to come in slowly, but right as I'm coming in, I notice my kid's bike is just laying there right in front of the, where I need to pull in. So I had stop, get your bike out of the road, roll down the window, and he takes it and drags it across like it's, instead of picking it up and nicely roll it, he drags it across like it's a dead body or something like that. It's like, come on, have some respect for your bike, buddy, come on. So anyway, I pull in, and I get in the house, and my arms are full of stuff I'm carrying, and one of the kids is next to the door, so I can't open the door. I'm like, come on, move out of the way, come on. And then I look at the dishwasher, and my wife has the dishwasher pulled apart, and she's like, oh, the dishwasher is not draining. I'm like, oh, and our clothes washer, that reminded me of the clothes washer that's locked shut, and the guy can't come until Monday, and it stinks. It's like skunk water in our clothes washer. Our dishwasher now is broke. And I'm just like, oh, man, and so I'm just kind of frustrated. And then Shannon tells me, oh, by the way, your daughter pooped in the pool today, and your son dropped your tablet and broke the screen. And I'm just like, I was really in a really good mood. I went to the store and bought ice cream. We're going to celebrate, have a good night, family night. And then I'm just like, and so it's kind of, it must have been showing all over my face, because I'm sitting there on the couch, and Donalyn came over, and Shannon was going to do something with her hair or something like that, and she's like, you look really agitated. I was like, yeah, I'm agitated. And then she's like, oh, well, there's something I needed to tell you. She tells me another thing I didn't want to hear. So anyway, just, one of those days. And, I think sometimes when we're parents or when we're with family, life can completely go sideways. And that's exactly what we're seeing in this chapter. And sometimes it takes things to go wrong in our lives before we're ready to look up. Before we're ready to say, God, where are you? The interesting thing is that God is always there. But you ever feel like He's not there? Where's God? Where is God? He's right there next to you, wanting you to feel like He's not there. That's where He is. And why? Because there's sometimes when we need to be in that place of emptiness, where we need to be, I don't know about you, but God seems to whisper to me in my pleasure, but He screams to me in my pain and my frustration, in my inadequacies. And so in this chapter, it's almost as though, the mistakes that Jacob is making, the things that are happening in his life, and he's probably wondering, God, where are you? And yet it would seem that God would, at the end of this chapter, have his full attention. And so it says in verse 1, now Dinah, the daughter of Leah, and she's Jacob and Leah's daughter, or Israel and Leah's daughter, whom she had borne to Jacob, went out to see the daughters of the land. So here you have these Bedouin people. Of course, before, we saw last time, Jacob built a house. They lived outside of Canaan for a little while in this house that he built, which is completely different than Abraham and Isaac. They lived in tents, and Jacob tried his hand at being a house owner, a homeowner for a while, and lived there for a while, and his kids grew up. He was there for about 8 years, outside of God's will. God told him, go back to Bethel. He didn't go. He went, kind of scared of his brother, probably scared of Esau. He builds this house and he kind of hangs out, waiting for whatever, who knows what, something to happen. And then finally we see him in partial obedience, and this seems to be, a family trait. Partial obedience. He moves back over the border, back over the Jordan River into the land of Canaan, and he pitches his tent near Shechem. And he buys some land there near Shechem to I suppose, establish himself. And he builds booths for himself, for his cattle and things, so that he can, stay there for a while. And he builds an altar to the Lord. And what's interesting about the altar that he builds to the Lord is that it wasn't something that the Lord asked him to build. He just did it. And it's almost like, Lord, I'm going to build you this altar. I'm ready to submit. And yet, in reality, he was not ready to submit yet. He was supposed to go back to his family, and he wasn't going to go there. Probably because he couldn't face his dad because of the lies and the deception that he gave 20, now 30 years before. Lying and deceiving his dad. Still wondering, is my brother going to kill me? Of course, his brother's a little bit farther south in Seir, but, he's just kind of wondering all these things and trying to hang out, doing his own thing, and in partial obedience to the Lord. And so he builds this altar. And I think that we do that sometimes. We think, I'm not really doing what God wanted me to do. I'm kind of living my own dream or my own way, but I'm going to be religious about it. And we build ourselves a little monument or a little religious thing, and we feel like, hey, I'm going to serve the Lord, even though I'm not really being obedient to Him. I'm going to acknowledge Him at least. And so he builds this altar, but in spite of that, his daughter goes out to check out the daughters of the land, or the girls that live near there, the city dweller girls, they live there in Shechem. It's an interesting thing. As Christians, we have these children that are given to us as a blessing, as a privilege of the Lord to protect and to keep and to minister to and to, just be, the hand of God and the voice of God into their lives, and to speak, the life of God into their lives. And yet, I think a lot of what happens within our children's lives, can really depend upon the culture that we let them engage with. And here, for whatever reason, and we don't know if she snuck out or if she's, allowed to go into the city, but she goes out and hangs out with the girls of that place. And we know, what's interesting is, a few years before, probably close to 100 years before, Abraham was visited by God, and He told him that your descendants are going to be in a foreign land for 4 generations. And that 4 generations turns out in that rendering to be 400 years. And He gives him a reason for it. He says, because the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. And so when you think of the Canaanite people, the Amorites, the Perizzites, the Hittites, all the Jebusites, the Uptites, the Cellulites, all the people that lived there, the only one who had a little bit left of room for repentance was the Amorites. They were the only ones who were not completely given over to wicked debauchery and sin. In fact, it was no different in those lands and in those places and the things that those people practiced than what was happening in Sodom and Gomorrah, that God allowed fire and brimstone to fall upon those cities and completely destroy them. But God was not going to drive them out, was not going to wipe them out until the Amorites were completely gone too. But what that means is that where Jacob pitched his tent and near Shechem, that the people of Shechem, Canaanite people, descendants, were very, very wicked people. And now he's allowing his daughter, and I don't understand. I mean, if you're a parent and you have a teenage daughter and you're kind of strict with them, good for you. Or boy, whatever, good for you. You need to be a strict parent. You know, my wife and I, you know, we counsel too many people. And you wouldn't believe the things that happen to kids when they're allowed just to run the streets, or when they're allowed to spend the night over at a friend's house, or, you know, there's so many things, and just how quickly even families that they trusted, or even within their own family, how quickly things can go sideways, and how important it is for us to be able to minister to our kids and to warn them of those things. And we can't, I mean, nobody's kids are perfect. You know, I mean, we've had problems even under our own care. And we had this lady that we used to watch. Her name was Sue. She was in her 50s, but she was, you know, mentally handicapped, and Shannon and I, it was our first child, really. Sue. She lived next door, you know, and we took care of her, and it was kind of our job to watch after her, make sure she's doing what she's supposed to do and everything. And she got a friend named Dave. And Dave came over, and one time Shannon went over and knocked on the door and said, "Hey, Sue," and Dave had come over, and she saw Dave go in the house, and she just, you know, tried to keep accountability and stuff, and she knocked on the door, and she's like, I can't come to the door, you know. It's like, what's going on, you know? Dave doesn't have his pants on, you know. It's like, oh no, you know, what's happened? Our child, you know, whatever. But the thing about it is you just don't know the dangers, right? You know. And so it was kind of comical, you know. I mean, she's in her 50s, and so it's kind of interesting. She says, "Sue, you know, you can't do that unless you're married." I know, you know. And then so then her brother comes to pick her up, you know, and he's a physician, and he has a new wife and everything, and they were going to come pick up Dave and Sue to go out to dinner, and they came out of the house, and Sue has a big smile on her face, and they get into the car, and they're getting ready to leave, and I tell her brother, "Hey, we probably should talk about some things that, you know, went on," and he says, "Yeah, well, we got to get going, but we'll talk afterwards." And then Sue announces, "Guess what? We're getting married." And they did. They got married. But you just never know. You never know what your kids are into, whether they're in their 50s or young. Anyway, verse 2, it says, "And when Shechem, the son of Hamor, the Hivite, prince of the country, saw her, he took her and lay with her and violated her." So, possibly raped her. It could be that he just seduced her. We don't know. It doesn't really give us detail about what happened or what led to all of this. But it says, verse 3, "His soul was strongly attracted to Dinah, the daughter of Jacob, and he loved the young woman and spoke kindly to the young woman." So we don't know if this happened afterwards, or this is how, you know, I mean, who knows what the city was like. If he was the prince of the country, you know, maybe he had a big palace, you know, or whatever, and she was taken by him, and he was taken by her, and so one thing led to another, you know, and it's just a really sad thing. You know, it wasn't something that was considered acceptable in Jacob's household, and yet in this country, who knows? You know, maybe they just took whatever they wanted, you know, and we saw that in Sodom. You know, this is the kind of the vibe of this country, those low in moral standards. And so he took her, violated her, but he loved her and he spoke kindly to her. And so Shechem, verse 4, spoke to his father Hamor, saying, "Give me this young woman as a wife." Now, I don't know. When I read this, the tone I read into this is just really selfish. You know, it's not, "Hey, Dad, you know, will you check into this woman for me?" No, it's demanding. It's, "Give me this young woman as a wife." Very disrespectful. You know, and I think that, you know, it kind of shows the way this child's, you know, maybe he was given everything he wanted, but just very disrespectful to his father, and taken something that doesn't belong to him. And that's a difficult thing. You know, it's amazing to me how many young men I talk to that struggle with problems, with lust, with just difficulty in their life, and they come to me and they ask me, what do I do? How do I get rid of this lust in my life? And I know that part of that is a chemical thing, part of that is a natural thing, and part of that is a sin thing, right? I mean, it's a multi-layered thing, because here's a young man who has a lot of, especially when they're, when they're 18, 20-year-old, they have a lot of hormones happening, and, and it's hit them in a way that they're blown away by. Now, all of a sudden, they just are overwhelmed with, women. And, this, especially this time of year, I think I've talked to 3 guys this week, about these types of issues. It's like, what do I do? How do I deal with this? And so I explained to him, you do have a lot of hormones going on in your body right now. Every young man struggles with this type of thing. You have a natural desire to be married, to have a woman, and that's a natural thing. But then there's also the part of it that that there is one woman that God has for you, and that you don't want to take anything before God has given it to you. In other words, you want to spend a lot of money and put a lot of thought into this woman before, a lot of money on a ring or something, and then to stand before God and make vows before God and everybody to say, I'm going to be faithful to you. Because when you take something before you've made those commitments, and before you've stood before everybody, and before you've made promises to love and to cherish and to be there in sickness and in health until death do you part, until you've done that, you've cheapened that relationship that you had. You've hurt it. And who knows if you end up not being married to this person that you've given yourself to or taken from, whatever the case may be, then you've robbed somebody else who's now going to be that woman's husband or that man's wife. You think about that. Because you may have spoken like this guy, spoken tenderly to them. Words like, I love you, or words like, you make me feel wonderful, or maybe you called them baby, and now when they're married and they're with their spouse, and their spouse just in that moment of love and appreciation says, oh baby, all of a sudden that which was stolen because of this decision that they made, that brings up all kinds of baggage from the past, and now don't ever call me that again. Can you imagine how awful that must be, to think that you can't just be with each other and be free to say anything or touch anyway or love anyway because of something that was stolen. And so this guy, he just takes something without giving anything. And I think that's so important. Our culture has completely lost this. This idea that marriage is sacred and that it's built on promises. It's built on just a sacred bond between a man and a woman. So he loves her, but he takes something from her, and it's not really the loving thing to do. And then he speaks disrespectfully to his father. I think it's interesting to me because I see kids speak disrespectfully to their parents all the time, and sometimes my kids speak disrespectfully to me. And that's a tough thing. And hopefully as our children grow and they speak disrespectfully to us, then we correct them. But it's an interesting thing to see the way that they speak to you, because sometimes what they're doing is they're mirroring what they're seeing before themselves as they watch their mom and their dad speak to each other. A lot of times you'll see the children kind of mimic that behavior. And so as a husband and a wife, it's very important that we raise our kids up to know Jesus and to learn respect. I was disciplining my daughter yesterday, and I told her, I said, honey, and it was a direct disobedience thing. I told her to do something. Actually she'd been disciplined for something else. And I said, Hannah, come here, please. And she just kept going the other way. She's like, whoa. And of course she was upset, so I get that. But I went in and I said, you know what? We're going to have to try that again. And I have to give her a little discipline. And then I said, Hannah, come here, please. And I had this conversation with her and I said, Hannah, what's interesting is, Daddy told you to come and you didn't come. And now I've had to give you a discipline and I didn't want to give you a discipline. But here's the thing. If you don't obey Mommy and Daddy, then when you grow up, you're not going to want to obey your husband either. And do you want to be a disobedient, rebellious wife to your husband? And she's like, no. And I said, okay, well, that's why I'm teaching you to obey. It's so important that you obey. Because you walk all over your husband and he'll be a sad, sad, sad boy, if you don't learn to be a submissive wife, if you don't learn to be loving to your husband. And so you see this, his is so disrespectful. Give me her as a wife. And so what does his dad do? Verse 5, it says, and Jacob heard that he had defiled Dinah his daughter. Now his sons were with his livestock in the field. So Jacob held his peace until they came. Then Hamor, the father of Shechem, went out to Jacob to speak with him. And so Jacob finds out about it. He doesn't do anything about it at first. It says he holds his peace. And this is another thing that's kind of difficult. I don't know if you remember the story of David and his sons. He had a son named Amnon and he had a daughter named Tamar. And of course Tamar was Absalom's full sister, but Amnon was from another wife, and so Amnon saw Tamar and he thought she was beautiful, even though it was his sister, and he took her and he raped her. And this whole thing went down, and different than this case. In that case, Amnon, after he did that, he hated her. In fact, his hatred for her was more than his love had been previously. And so he basically cast her out, and she says, this is worse to cast me out like this than what you did previously. If you would have asked my father, he probably would have given me to you. And so it was just this awful thing. And because David didn't do anything about it, no doubt David, thinking of his own sin with Bathsheba, and his own sin with Uriah the Hittite and all those things, and now his son is doing basically the same thing that he did, taking something that didn't belong to him, and his response was, who am I to talk? And he doesn't do anything about what his son did, and because he didn't do anything about it, his other son, Absalom, taking vengeance for his sister, would kill Amnon. And same type of thing here. Jacob, he hears about it, but he keeps silent about it. He holds his peace. I think that we would do a lot better to deal with it. To be a little bit aggressive sometimes as dads when it comes to our kids and when it comes to, dealing with problems. I got a call. I went home early today. I'd been working on the building a little bit, and I decided I better go home, take a shower, and I decided to take a quick nap, and I laid down for just a minute, and my phone rang. And it was a guy. The number said Twin Falls, but it was just some guy from India. He was living, I guess, in Idaho, but he was from India. And he yells at me on the phone, and he says, your daughter, she came over to my house, she kicked my dog, and she left. Why did she do that? And I said, I think you might have the wrong number. I don't think my daughter went over to... She kicked my dog. Why did she do that? And I said, I think you have the wrong number. And he says, I have to take my dog to get its surgery. She kicked my dog. And I was like, I'm sorry. It wasn't my daughter. I'm pretty sure she hasn't left the house. He's like, shut up, shut up, shut up, shut up. And I was like, okay, click. I hung up the phone. He didn't call back. I don't know. It was really bizarre. But I'm like in the middle of sleeping. I just fall asleep, and I'm having this guy, Indian guy, very aggressively yell at me. I think it would be good if fathers would take that kind of care to, if their kids are in trouble. Or if somebody is, hurting their children, to step up and say, you know what, this isn't right. I mean, don't speak in an Indian accent or anything like that, but just to deal with it. Sometimes we don't know what to say, or we don't want to stir the pot. But if your child's been hurt by somebody, then you need to deal with it. Jacob, it doesn't. It says, verse 7, and the sons of Jacob came from the field. When they heard it, the men were grieved and very angry, because he had done a disgraceful thing in Israel by lying with Jacob's daughter, a thing which ought not to be done. And so Jacob's kind of passive in the whole thing. He doesn't tell us that he was angry. It just says that he kept his silence until the men came. But Jacob's sons, coming in from the field, were very angry. Very angry, and a thing which should not be done in Israel. This is the first time that the land is referred to as Israel. But it's something, and they're becoming a culture within themselves, and their standards are higher than this. This is not the way things are done within our family. And that's something we have to be aware of. There are things within our families that we're not going to allow. Things that other families allow. And so we have to be very careful when it comes to our children, that they're raised with the understanding of what is right and what is wrong. And this is why we don't do the things we do, and this is why we do the things we do. To raise them with that awareness and a love for God. And I think that's the most important thing. I think when it comes to parenting, the most important thing for us is to develop a culture within our family that is focused on Jesus and focused on knowing and loving Jesus. Not a culture of rules as much as a culture of honor and honoring God in our family. I think oftentimes we are too passive. Now, when I was first married, my wife would say stuff, and she was young and she didn't understand how men think or how men work, but she would say stuff like, how come you never do devotions with me? Okay, if you want your husband to do devotions with you, don't approach him like that. Young men their egos are very fragile, and they don't respond well to that. And I didn't respond well to that. I just kind of shut down and like, hell freeze over before I ever do devotions with you now. That was my immature response. So as husbands, we have to be willing to understand where our wives are coming from. I want more Jesus in our lives. I want, it's not accusing. It's just, this is what I crave. I crave this. If you want your husband to do devotions with you, how do you approach it? You say, honey, you're so smart. Will you teach the Bible to me? I mean, what husband, if his wife said that to him, you're so spiritual, you're so smart, you know so much more. Will you teach the Bible to me? What husband would not be like, I don't know much about the Bible, but I'm going to find out so I can teach it to her, right? I mean, he would totally be on that. Would you read the Bible to me? You have such a great voice. Will you read the Bible to me? I mean, what husband wouldn't respond to that? I mean, that's just, that. If you want to speak his language, be careful of his ego, and approach him like that. Because the problem is that it comes across so often so abrasive. But that's, and I don't know what Jacob's vibe was or why he didn't lead his family spiritually in this way up to this point. But for whatever reason, it seems like as far as his relationship with God, it was between Jacob and God. And he wasn't really sharing that. We're going to see a little later on he begins to, but he doesn't really share that with his family in the way that he should. And so maybe your ego's been shattered before, or maybe you've been, felt disrespected in the past, when it comes to, devotions and stuff, and you felt like your wife was a spiritual giant and you're the spiritual nincompoop. And she wasn't careful with your feelings. I understand. It happens to every married couple. But be a man. Pick up the Bible and share it with your family. Whether you feel disrespected or not, say, okay, this is what we're going to do. We're going to, read the Bible together as a family. We're going to, know Jesus, because it's so important that your kids pick that up from you. If you say, well, I just want them to grow up and let them decide which way they want to go, the devil doesn't do that. He doesn't just let them decide. He's going to pursue them like nothing else. You have to be there to lead your kids to Jesus. Husbands and wives both. But Jacob obviously hasn't done his part in this, and we're going to see that. It says, verse 8, but Hamor spoke with them, saying, the soul of Shechem longs for your daughter. Please give her to him as a wife. And so at least Shechem, even though he's taken what wasn't right, he's going to do the honorable thing, and he wants to marry her, as far as that goes. And his dad comes to her dad and tries to work this out. And that's the way that things would work in those days. That the fathers would get together, they would arrange the marriage, and make sure that everything was amicable between the two families. And that's the way a lot of things were done back then. And he says, beyond that, verse 9, and make marriages with us, give your daughters to us, and take our daughters to yourself, so they shall dwell with us, and the land shall be before you. Dwell and trade in it, and acquire possessions for yourself in it. Then Shechem said to her father and her brothers, let me find favor in your eyes, and whatever you say to me, I will give. So dad starts out speaking, but then Shechem, he can see that his dad's not getting through, and so he kicks in, and he says, I'll give you anything. Ask me, verse 12, ever so much dowry and gift, and I will give according to what you say to me, but give me the young woman as a wife. So he's saying, I'll give what I should have given in the first place. And this should have been the way that the whole thing started, but it unfortunately didn't. Verse 13, but the sons of Jacob answered Shechem and Hamor his father, and spoke deceitfully, because he had defiled Dinah their sister. And they said to him, we cannot do this thing, to give our sister to one who is uncircumcised, for that would be a reproach to us. And so now they bring God into it. We're so set apart, we're so different, and it's not spiritual for us to give our daughter or to our sister to somebody who's uncircumcised. Was this their motive? It could be true. Somebody would have to become a Jew and be part of that whole culture to really be able to safely give their kids back and forth, to worship the God of Israel and all of that. But they're speaking deceitfully, and they're saying this because they have a sinister plan. It says, verse 15, but on this condition we will consent to you, if you will become as we are. If every male of you is circumcised, then we will give our daughters to you, and we will take your daughters to us, and we will dwell with you, and we will become one people. Now, remember what God has told Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Go to the place where I show you. Be separate. Don't mix with the people. And this is the instruction he'll give to Israel, and yet here they're saying, hey, this is our intention. We'll be one people with you. But if you will not heed us and be circumcised, then we will take our daughter and be gone. And the words pleased Hamor and Shechem, Hamor's son. Circumcision. Okay. Now this really shows us something. This really shows us that this guy really loved this girl. He's willing to go through that so that he could be married to her. He's all in, But now it's his job to go and sell that to all the other guys of his country. Hey guys, got good news. We're going to all be able to share. Yeah. So that's what he does. It says, so the young man did not delay to do the thing, so he circumcised himself immediately. Because he delighted in Jacob's daughter, he was more honorable than all of the household of his father. And Hamor and Shechem his son came to the gate of their city and spoke with the men of the city, saying, these men are at peace with us. So this is how they're selling it, okay? It's a pretty good sales pitch. Therefore, let them dwell in the land and trade in it. For indeed the land is large enough for them. Let us take our daughters to us as their daughters to us as wives, and give them our daughters. Only this condition. We, the men, consent to dwell with us, to be one people if every male among us is circumcised, as they are circumcised. So he's probably just slipped that in real quick. Oh, by the way, you just got to be circumcised. Will not their livestock, and so he butters it up again, their livestock, their property, and every animal of theirs be ours? Only let us consent to them, and they will dwell with us. In other words, when they get married to our daughters, they're going to give dowries. Look how rich they are. You want your daughters to marry a rich guy, right? And, you want them to bring big dowries. Look how rich you guys are going to be. All their livestock are going to be ours. Look how many men they have. They'll take daughters from all of you, and you guys will all have 10 cows, And so he was a pretty good salesman, because it says, verse 24, and all who went out of the gate of a city heeded Hamor and Shechem his son, and every male was circumcised, all who went out of the gate of the city. So these guys, they're pretty honorable in that. They all get circumcised. And you got to remember, this is not a time where they had moils, where they had, anesthetic, where they had antibiotics. This is actually a risky thing to do. Being circumcised is very, very prone, just by virtue of what you're doing. It's very, very prone to infection, very, very prone to bad conditions, dirty conditions. And so they go through with it. Now it came to pass, verse 25, on the third day when they were in pain, that two of the sons of Jacob, Simeon and Levi, Dinah's brothers, each took his sword and came boldly upon the city and killed the males. And they killed Hamor and Shechem, his son, with the edge of the sword, and took Dinah from Shechem's house and went out. So Dinah, Shechem, and Hamor were all living together. He'd taken her as a wife, and now these two sons go in, and everybody's kind of probably feverish, weak, sick. They're in the middle of healing from the infection of getting circumcised, and they go in and kill every man of the city. Now, it's difficult to know how many people were in the city. How many of these guys, was it a big city, a small city? I assume it was probably a smaller city. But kind of miraculous, really, if you think about it. These two guys, these guys are probably in their 20s, early 20s, go in and kill every man and every son of the entire city. Pretty wild. And it says the sons of Jacob, and we don't know if this is all the rest of the sons came together or if it was just the two, but it says the sons of Jacob came upon the slain, seems like it's probably all the sons, and plundered the city because of their sister had been defiled, and took their sheep, their oxen, their donkeys, what was in the city and what was in the field, and all their wealth, and all the little ones, and their wives took captives, and they plundered even all that was in the houses. And so they basically killed everybody, murdered everybody, and took everything away. Now, just think about this for a minute. Maybe your kids have gone off the rails. Maybe they've done some things that they shouldn't have done. We can take some consolation that probably none of our kids have done that much, right? I mean, this is pretty bad. I mean, you think about it, you find out your kids, this is like finding out your kids like Charles Manson or Jeffrey Dahmer or something like that, just go in and murder a bunch of people. This is it's something we got to think about too as individuals. When we are wronged, what does the Bible tell us? It says, give place to wrath. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, says the Lord. So if your enemy is hungry, feed him. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. For by doing so, you'll be pouring hot coals upon his head. Don't be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. The Bible's very clear when it comes to the wrong that is done to us, that we as Christians are to forgive. And to what degree? To the degree that Jesus forgave us. There's no room within Christianity, because Jesus died for all of our sins. And not only all of our sins, but as John tells us in John 2:20, is it John 2:2? 2 John 2:2, I don't know which verse it is, but it says that he not only died for our sins, but the sins of the whole world. And so if Jesus died for the sins of the people who did something wrong to you, if I'm going to accuse them, to hold that against them, then I'm saying that my standard of judgment, or my standard of right and wrong, is higher than that of God's, or my standard of forgiveness is higher than that of God's standard of forgiveness. You know, and I don't want to be in the place where my forgiveness is at a higher cost than God's forgiveness is. And so what do I do with that? I mean, how do I deal with that? You know, you confess it as sin. It falls short of God's glory. I know that you died for that sin. I know that you did that. I confess it as sin. And then you ask God for His forgiveness for that situation. You know, otherwise you end up doing a lot of things that you're going to end up regretting. And this is definitely regrettable as we see this. It says, verse 30, then Jacob said to Simeon and Levi, you have troubled me by making me obnoxious among the inhabitants of the land, among the Canaanites and the Perizzites. And since I am few in number, they will gather themselves together against me and kill me, and I shall be destroyed, and my household and I. Now, it would seem, you know, as you go through this, you don't see that he really does anything. There's no consequence for what Levi and Simeon did here. You know, it's like they're just going to move on, and Levi and Simeon are just going to go on with their lives and marry wives and everything. But when Jacob dies, and we read that in Genesis chapter 49, before he draws his feet up into his bed with his staff and he dies, he says in Genesis 49 verse 5, Simeon and Levi are brothers, instruments of cruelty are in their dwelling place. Let not my soul enter their council, let not my honor be united to their assembly. For in their anger they slew a man, and in their self-will they hamstrung an ox. Cursed be their anger, for it is fierce, and their wrath, for it is cruel. I will divide them in Jacob and scatter them in Israel. And so we see that. Simeon ends up becoming part of the tribe of Judah and just kind of gets absorbed into the tribe of Judah. And then Levi is scattered in Israel as well, but God does something different with Levi and honestly shows grace on the tribe of Levi, as Levi isn't given any of the land, but instead are made the priestly tribe, which is kind of interesting. You know, even though Levi had done evil in the sight of the Lord and in the sight of his father, and even though this curse was upon him, God turned the curse into a blessing. And it's interesting because, you know, the way Tozer describes it is that Levi soon became richer than all of his brethren before God was his inheritance. And that's what Levi's inheritance became, was God. And Levi, because God was his inheritance, had everything. All things in one. He had all things in God. And so God, you know, definitely shows His grace through this situation. But there's definitely a curse that was doled out to these two guys. It says, verse 31, but they said, should he treat our sister like a harlot? And no doubt, you know, they're justified in that. But as you know, two wrongs don't make a right. You know, I deal with that every day. 5 kids in the house. I watch one kid punch another kid in the head. You know, 2 boys, you know, it's always the same 2 boys. Punch another one in the head. And I was like, why did you punch him in the head? Because he did this. You know, it's like, you know, you can't act like that. You know, you can't do that. You can't try to drown him. You can't, you know, you can't do that. You know, but it is. It's like, he did this to me, and that's why I did that to him. Or she hurt me, and that's why I hurt her. You know, as Christians, we don't act like that. But here's Jacob. He's at the end of this chapter with a daughter who's been defiled, with 2 sons who've committed murder and destroyed an entire city of people, and now have benefited from it because they have all the women and all the oxen and all the donkeys and all the sheep that they plundered from the people, and all the wealth that they plundered from them. And he's looking at the nations around him, the Canaanites and the Perizzites, and he's like, we are going to be destroyed by these people. We are in big trouble. And you ever felt like that? You know, like, I am in big trouble. We have bills due. We have, kids, fighting each other. We have all these things wrong in our lives. And, God, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? And oftentimes it's that place where we find ourselves, again, wondering where God is. And the whole time God has been right there, wanting you not to feel that He's right there. Because He knows that the lessons you're going to learn by turning to the Lord in the difficult times and in the midst of the pain are going to be the times when you really find Him. Because those are the times, unfortunately, oftentimes, that we seek Him. And so it says, verse 1, we're going to go to verse 8, so or 7. So we're not going to go too far. But it says, Then God said to Jacob, Arise and go to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar to me there, or make an altar there to God, who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. So remember last chapter he built an altar, chapter 33, built an altar that God did not ask for. Set up a shrine, making a religious show of himself, but not really having the substance there, not having the reality there. And God says, I want you to go to Bethel, and I want you to build an altar there for me. And Jacob said to his household, and I love Jacob's response to this, and this should always be our response when we find ourselves not really following the Lord in our lives, or going through a dry spell, or we haven't really been doing what we're supposed to be doing. And I even go through those things, so I know everybody does. Times when things are dry, times when I don't feel close to God, times when I need something, or I feel I'm lacking something. And I love what he says here. He says, Jacob said to his household and to all who were with him, put away the foreign gods that are among you. That's the first thing that we have to do, is put away the foreign gods that are among you. What foreign gods? I mean, we don't worship little idols, right? We don't have Rachel's teraphim that she hid under her saddlebags. I kind of wonder what would happen when he saw that she had those things back that she'd stolen from Laban, her father. But what do we have? Well, I mean, if you think about it, the god Ashtoreth was the god of pornography, of sex, and all of that. And I think that that's a huge thing that people are into. And I'm not just talking about pictures, I'm talking about those novels too. There's 50 Shades of Grey and whatever else. That's pornography. Don't kid yourself. It's all over the shelves. All the different romance novels, Harlequin romances and stuff like that. I remember my grandma used to read that stuff. I had no idea she was sitting there reading pornography right in front of me. Until I picked one of those books up and started to read, and I was like, oh my goodness, It's crazy. It's just as bad. That's what women like. Women like that side of it. Men like the pictures. It's no different than boys and girls. They want to look at the pictures, and the girls want to read the book. But it's still there. Bacchus, the god of alcoholism and wine. To drink. To get ourselves wasted because we're trying to escape life, or high. That's what the people who worship Bacchus did. Molech. To worship pleasure with no consequence, and they would burn their babies. Babies would be born is no different than abortion. He's saying, put away the gods that are among you. What is it that draws you more than Jesus? Put it away. See, the thing is when we have a problem in life, it's not a sin problem ever as much as it is a lordship problem. What I tell those young guys when they come to me and they say, hey, I'm struggling with lust, or I'm struggling with pornography, or I'm struggling with this or that, what do I tell them? Or my marriage isn't good, I say, you need to fall in love with Jesus. Jesus is the only thing that is better, that is brighter, that is more fulfilling than all of that. He satisfies. You're never going to find anything in this life, no amount of wealth, no amount of women, no amount of pleasure, no amount of thrill. You're never going to find anything in this life that satisfies more than Jesus does. Never. And yet it's interesting because Jesus would say it. He says, you search the Scriptures, for in them you think you have eternal life, but it is those things that testify of me. But you are not willing to come to me that you might have life. In Him is life. and life more abundantly. He tells us, in the Psalms, in my presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand, in your presence is fullness of joy, and at your right hand pleasures forevermore. That's what Jesus has to offer. So he says, put away your foreign gods that are among you, purify yourself. How does a young man make his way pure? By taking heed to the Word. Not just reading the Word, but doing what the Word says, Taking heed to your Word. And he says, change your garments. Change your garments. Take off those dirty clothes and put on new clothes. Nothing like putting on brand new clothes, is it? I mean, it's just kind of a good feeling. Nothing like changing the sheets in your bed. You sleep in a brand new, just freshly changed bed. Still smells like the fabric softener. He says, spiritually change your garments. Take off the filthy rags and put on the righteousness of Christ. Let us arise and go to Bethel, the house of God. That's what that means. And I will make an altar there to God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and has been with me in the way which I have gone. You see, he called out to God. It doesn't tell us that, but that's what he did. He called out to God, and God answered him. Sometimes that's the biggest thing. Like, what am I going to do with all my problems? How am I going to deal with all these things? My life is so sideways. Cry out to Jesus, right? Cry out to God, and He'll answer you in your distress. And it says, He's answered me in my day of distress, and He's been with me in the way which I have gone. He's been here all along. So they gave Jacob all the foreign gods which were in their hands, and the earrings, they had amulets, which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the terebinth tree, which is in Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were all around them, and they did not pursue the sons of Jacob. So even though they'd committed this atrocious sin, God put fear in the cities for them. God protects His people. Sometimes we think we're getting away with sin. No, God's just giving us space to repent. We don't get away with sin. Verse 6, so Jacob came to Luz, that is Bethel, which is in the land of Canaan, he and all the people who were with him, and they built an altar there and called the place El Bethel, because God appeared to him when he fled from the face of his brother. It's interesting because he called the place Bethel. Remember when he was there fleeing from his brother, he saw the ladder. He says, I didn't realize that this is the house of God. But now he calls the place El Bethel. And so he came to the house of God the first time, but now he's coming to God of the house of God. And that's what El Bethel means, God of the house of God. And so now he's coming to God Himself. And that's where we need to come, We need to come directly to God. He's the one who meets us in our distress. It doesn't matter what we've done or where we've been. I mean, it's obvious. You read the Bible and you see the awful things that people have done in their lives. And we see the fallout from it. And yet Jesus is there with open arms. He's always there. Maybe He's just there making you feel like He's not there. But He's there. And He's willing to accept you. Let's pray.